When was the last time life actually got easier? Seriously, not a new phone, not a pay rise, not a lucky month. I mean life itself. Because if you're anything like me, it feels as though every year another small cost appears that simply didn't exist before. The rent goes up, the insurance renewal jumps for no obvious reason. Your streaming service quietly increases its price. The app you've been using for years suddenly locks its best features behind a subscription. Parking becomes more expensive. Driving becomes more expensive. Owning a car becomes more expensive. Not owning a car becomes more inconvenient. The weekly food shop somehow costs more than it did last month, even though your trolley doesn't look any fuller. You order the same meal you've always ordered, and the portion is smaller. The product you trusted feels cheaper, the airline seat feels tighter, the coffee costs more, customer service has become a chatbot, and somewhere along the way you stopped asking, why is this one thing getting more expensive, and started asking, why does everything feel harder? Because that's the feeling, isn't it? Not one catastrophic event, not one bill that's impossible to pay, just pressure, constant pressure, like somebody is tightening a screw 1/4 turn every few months. Enough that you notice, not enough that you revolt. Until one day you wake up and realize you aren't living differently, you're just working harder to stand still. Here's the strange part. If you only looked at the headlines, you'd think everything was fine. The economy is growing, employment is relatively strong, consumers are still spending, the stock market is near record highs, corporate earnings continue to surprise analysts. So, who's wrong? The economists or the people living inside the economy? I don't actually think either of them are. I think they're answering two completely different questions. Economists often ask, is the economy producing? Ordinary people ask, can I still afford a normal life? Those are not the same question. And somewhere over the last 20 years, we've started confusing them. Because here's something that's surprisingly difficult to define. What actually is a normal life? Not luxury, not wealth, just normal. Think about it for a second. Somewhere decent to live. Food in the fridge, a reliable way to get to work, healthcare when you need it, insurance that doesn't bankrupt you. If you choose to have children, childcare you can actually afford, the occasional holiday, a few dinners out, enough left over at the end of the month that one unexpected bill doesn't throw your entire life into chaos. That doesn't sound extravagant, it sounds ordinary, or at least it used to. Because what I think has happened is that we quietly stopped pricing individual things and started repricing normal life itself. That's the distinction this whole video is about. The problem isn't simply that housing became more expensive, or groceries, or childcare, or transport, or insurance, or subscriptions. The problem is that all of them moved at roughly the same time. Not enough individually to completely break the household, but together, they change the cost of being an adult. That's why this doesn't feel like inflation anymore. It feels like something else. It feels like normal life itself has become a premium product. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this just inflation? Not exactly. Inflation explains why prices rise. It doesn't explain why people can simultaneously hear that the economy is doing well while feeling worse every year. To understand that, we need to separate two ideas that most people assume are the same: the economy and your life. Because they're not. There's something that used to confuse me. I'd hear economists say the economy was doing well. Then I'd walk outside and almost everyone I spoke to felt worse off. At first glance, one of those things has to be wrong. Either the data is lying, or people are. Except neither is. They're simply measuring different things. Think about it like this. Imagine you own a small cafe. Last year, every customer spent $10. This year, coffee beans cost more, milk costs more, rent costs more, so you raise every coffee to $12. Now, imagine every customer keeps coming. Your revenue just increased 20%. On paper, the business is performing better. But has anyone actually become wealthier? Not really. Your customers are paying more just to drink the same coffee. You're earning more just to pay higher costs. The numbers got bigger, but nobody necessarily became better off. But scale that idea up, and you begin to understand something important. Economic activity isn't the same thing as economic progress. Because GDP doesn't ask, did life get easier? It asks, did money move? And money can move because things got better or because everything simply got more expensive. Those look surprisingly similar in the data, but they feel completely different if you're living inside them. That's why two completely reasonable people can look at exactly the same economy and come to opposite conclusions. One sees employment, corporate earnings, consumer spending, stock prices. The other sees their rent, their grocery bill, their insurance renewal, their nursery invoice, their mortgage payment. Neither person is wrong. They're just looking through different lenses. And here's the uncomfortable part. The household lens is usually the one politics eventually follows. Because voters don't experience GDP, they experience Thursday afternoon, standing at the checkout, wondering why 4 bags of groceries somehow costs $200. Housing became the gatekeeper. This is where the whole equation changes. Because once housing starts consuming a much larger percentage of household income, everything else becomes fragile. Think about almost every major life decision you'll ever make. Moving in with someone, getting married, having children, changing jobs, starting a business, saving for retirement. Nearly all of them begin with one question. Where am I going to live? Housing isn't just another expense. It's the platform every other expense sits on, which means when housing changes, everything changes. Imagine 2 identical households, same income, same jobs, same children, same spending habits. The only difference, one household spends 25% of its income on housing, the other spends 50%. Everything else about their lives immediately diverges. One can absorb surprises, the other cannot. One can save, the other borrows. One plans, the other reacts. One can think about opportunity, the other thinks about survival. That's why housing is different from almost every other category. It's not just more expensive, it changes how the rest of your money behaves. Housing doesn't simply take a bigger slice of the pie, it determines how much pie everybody else gets. And once that happens, every other bill suddenly feels heavier. Not because it necessarily grew more than inflation, but because there's less room left for it. That's why people earning 6 figures can still describe themselves as financially stretched, not because they're poor, because fixed costs became enormous, and fixed costs don't negotiate. The mortgage doesn't care that groceries went up. The landlord doesn't reduce the rent because childcare got more expensive. Insurance doesn't give you a discount because your electricity bill doubled. Each line item behaves as though it's the only bill you have. But households don't pay bills individually. They pay them all at once. And that's where the pressure starts building. Now, if housing is the first gatekeeper, there's another category that's quietly changing how millions of families think about the future, not because they don't want children, but because they're sitting down with a calculator before they even get that far. And that's where the conversation becomes much bigger than housing. It becomes about whether ordinary family life itself has become a luxury. Housing changes where you live. The next gatekeeper changes whether life moves forward at all. Children. And before anyone says this is just about having kids, it isn't. Because even if you never plan to have a family, you still have to have children. Children. And before anyone says this is just about having kids, it isn't. Because even if you never plan to have a family, you still have to have children. Children. And before anyone says this is just about having kids, it isn't. Because even if you never plan to have a family, you still have to have children. the economics are fascinating. For most of modern history, having children made life more complicated. Today, for a growing number of people, it also makes the financial maths stop working. Think about the conversation young couples have now. It isn't, do we want children? It's, can we afford them? Those are completely different questions, and the fact we've quietly swapped one for the other tells you something has changed. Because when childcare starts costing as much as a second rent, family planning stops being emotional and becomes financial. One of the strangest things about modern adulthood is that almost every sensible decision seems to create another bill. You move closer to work, the rent goes up. You move further away, transport goes up. You both keep working, childcare goes up. One parent stays home, household income falls. Every route solves one problem and creates another. Economists call these trade-offs. Most of us just call it life. But there's something different about today's trade-offs. They don't feel temporary. They feel permanent. That's why people often say, we're doing everything right, so why does it still feel impossible? They're not imagining it, because the goalposts haven't just moved. The entire playing field has become more expensive. And then there's something I've noticed, living in London as an example. Maybe you've noticed something similar where you live. It feels like movement itself has become something you pay for, not just fuel, everything. Drive into the wrong zone? Pay. Park in the wrong place? Pay. Renew the permit? Pay. Insurance? Pay. Congestion? Pay. Need to stop for a moment? Depending on where you are, even that can become a problem. Now, I'm not saying every one of these rules is unreasonable. Cities need funding, roads need maintaining, cleaner air is a worthwhile goal. That's not really the point. The point is what it feels like from the household's perspective. Because households don't experience policy, they experience invoices. One payment arrives, then another, each one perfectly logical on its own. But nobody pays bills one at a time. They pay all of them at once. And that's the difference. Take electric cars. For years, the message has been simple. Move away from petrol, buy electric, lower emissions. Fair enough. Except, once enough people begin making that switch, another question appears. If fewer people are paying fuel duty, how do governments fund the roads? Suddenly, the conversation becomes road pricing, mileage charging, annual EV fees. Again, I'm not arguing for or against those policies. I'm pointing out something more interesting. Notice the pattern. The old system becomes expensive, you're encouraged into the new one, then eventually the new one develops its own costs. It's almost as though every solution eventually becomes another place to collect revenue. And once you start looking for that pattern, it's difficult to stop seeing it, not because somebody planned it, but because every institution solves its own problem without anyone looking at the total burden placed on the household. The transport authority needs funding. The local council needs funding. The insurer reprices risk. The parking operator adjusts demand. The toll funds infrastructure. Every decision can make sense inside its own spreadsheet. But households don't live inside one spreadsheet. They live at the intersection of all of them. And that's why so many people feel like they're running faster without actually getting anywhere. But even after you've paid for the house, the transport, the childcare, there's another layer that's quietly changed the way almost all of us spend money. One that's so normal now, we barely even notice it anymore. The subscription economy. Unlike housing or childcare or transport, most of us barely noticed it happening because it didn't arrive as one big change. It arrived $10 at a time. You subscribe to your music, you subscribe to your films, you subscribe to your software, your cloud storage, your security cameras, your password manager, your AI assistant, your gym, your food deliveries, your news. Even the heated seats in some cars have at various points been offered as a subscription. Think about that for a second. Features that already exist inside the product, waiting for a monthly payment to unlock them. And that's the fascinating part. Companies realize something. Selling you something once is good. Charging you forever is better. Now, before this turns into an anti-subscription rant, subscriptions aren't automatically bad. For some products, they make perfect sense. Streaming music is genuinely better than buying thousands of CDs. Cloud storage solves real problems. Software updates are valuable. That's not the issue. The interesting question is this: what happens when more and more of normal life shifts from ownership to access? Because ownership behaves very differently from access. When you own something, the payment eventually ends. When you subscribe, the payment never ends. Ownership creates assets. Subscriptions create obligations. And once enough of your life moves into subscriptions, your income no longer builds freedom. It maintains access. Think about your bank statement. How much of it is made up of payments you actively decided to make this month, and how much is simply continuing? Renewals, direct debits, standing orders, auto-renewing subscriptions, monthly finance, insurance, storage, membership, services. None of them are particularly large. That's why they're so effective, because individually, they're easy to justify. Collectively, they become permanent leakage. That's modern household cash flow. Not one catastrophic expense, just dozens of tiny exits. And the strange thing is, most of them feel irreversible. Canceling something no longer feels like saving money. It feels like losing part of your life. You lose your photos, your playlists, your documents, your workflow, your convenience, your history, your ecosystem. Companies spent decades reducing friction when joining. Now many spend just as much time increasing friction when leaving, because retention is one of the most valuable assets a business can have. And that's not a criticism. It's simply how recurring revenue businesses work. Now, zoom out, because once you connect all these pieces together, housing, childcare, transport, subscriptions, something much bigger starts to appear. For decades, people talked about something called the American dream. Own a home, own a car, raise a family, build savings, retire comfortably, leave something behind. Whether or not that dream was ever universally available, it represented something important: progress. The belief that life became more stable over time. That if you worked, planned, saved, you gradually accumulated security. Now, ask yourself something. How many of those things are increasingly financed, leased, rented, or subscribed to instead? The house, the car, the entertainment, the software, the tools, the services. Even retirement, for many people, feels less like building wealth and more like hoping the numbers work. The dream didn't necessarily disappear. It changed pricing model. Instead of buying the bundle, we're increasingly renting pieces of it. That doesn't mean nobody succeeds. Millions of people still do, but the entry price has moved. And when the entry price moves faster than people's ability to build wealth, something important changes. People stop thinking about getting ahead. They start thinking about keeping up. And that's a completely different mindset. One builds confidence, the other builds anxiety. One creates optimism, the other creates caution. And if enough households make that psychological shift, the consequences don't stay inside the household. They spread into the wider economy. Because this isn't just about money anymore. It's about behavior, the way people spend, the way people save, the way people vote, the way people think about the future. And once enough households begin changing their behavior, it stops being a personal finance story and becomes a macroeconomic one. So, what's the real story here? Is it inflation? Partly. Is it housing? Partly. Is it childcare, transport, insurance, subscriptions? Again, partly. But none of those things on their own explain why so many people across different countries, different incomes, and different generations seem to be asking the same question. Why does it feel like I'm working harder just to stand still? Because this isn't really a story about expensive things. It's a story about affordability. Those are not the same thing. A Ferrari is expensive, that's expected. A normal life becoming expensive changes society. Because once ordinary adulthood starts feeling out of reach, people don't simply spend differently. They start living differently. They stay with their parents for longer. They delay moving out. They delay marriage. They delay having children. They delay starting businesses. They delay buying homes. They delay taking risks. And after a while, they stop delaying. They simply stop expecting those things to happen at all. That's a profound shift, because economies don't just run on money. They run on confidence. Not stock market confidence, not consumer confidence surveys, something much simpler. The belief that if you work hard, make sensible decisions, and play by the rules, your life will gradually become more secure. That belief is one of the most valuable assets any economy can have, and it's incredibly difficult to measure. You won't find it on a balance sheet, you won't see it in GDP, it doesn't appear in quarterly earnings, but when it starts disappearing, the effects show up everywhere else. In birth rates, in household debt, in political frustration, in consumer behavior, in housing demand, in productivity, in entrepreneurship, in the willingness to invest not just money but your future. Because why would you take risks if you no longer believe the reward is attainable? That's why affordability isn't just a household issue. It's a macroeconomic signal. It's one of the earliest indicators of whether people still believe the system works. And once enough people stop believing, markets eventually notice. Businesses eventually notice. Governments eventually notice. Usually much later than households do, because households feel these changes first. One grocery bill, one insurance renewal, one rent increase, one cancelled holiday, one delayed decision at a time. By the time those thousands of individual decisions become visible in the economic data, the culture has often already changed. And that's why I think we spend too much time asking whether the economy is growing and not enough time asking growing for whom. Because growth is important, innovation is important, investment is important, profits are important. But if ordinary people increasingly feel that a normal life is slipping further out of reach, then eventually the numbers and the lived experience begin telling two completely different stories. And economies cannot live with that contradiction forever. Eventually, one of them has to change. There's one more thing that really stands out to me. If normal life has become more expensive, people don't simply stop needing it. They adapt, they rent instead of buy, they lease instead of own, they finance instead of save, they subscribe instead of purchase. Month by month, payment by payment, renewal by renewal, ownership quietly gives way to access. And that raises a completely different question. Not why can nobody afford a normal life anymore, but when did we stop owning so much of it in the first place?